migrating from one monitoring tool to another can be quite a complex and long-term endeavor. Our next speaker is going to talk about one such use case. So let's welcome Wolfgang Alper, CEO at Intellitrend.
Hello and very welcome. My name is Wolfgang Alper from Intellitrend GmbH, and today I would like to share with you the talk Zabbix meets Research Institute Mastering the Migration. And this talk will be about the Fraunhofer Society, or in German Fraunhofer-Gesellschaft. And before I start to dig into the technical details within this project, I would like to give you some background information about the Fraunhofer Society. The Fraunhofer Society was founded in 1949, and the name is Fraunhofer Society for the Advancement of Applied Research, or in German Fraunhofer-Gesellschaft zur Förderung der angewandten Forschung e.V. And it's a German research organization with about 75 institutes spread throughout Germany, but they also have many facilities around the world, so in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, Middle East, and North-South America. And the purpose of the association is to conduct applied-oriented research for the direct benefits of companies and for the benefit of society. So they're looking for concrete results. The majority of the organization's 29,000 employees are qualified scientists and engineers who work on an annual research budget of about 2.8 billion euros. And those institutes work in practically all areas of application-relevant fields, such as microelectronics, information and communication technology, energy and medical technology, and more. And one of the best-known Fraunhofer developments most probably is the MP3 audio data compression for merge. The Fraunhofer Society is the biggest organization for applied research and development services within Europe. So let's go over the project, Mastering the Migration from OpenIT Cockpit to Zabbix. And OpenIT Cockpit used a Nagios backend. It can support different backend types, but in this case it was a Nagios backend. And I would like also to take the opportunity to say thank you to Mr. Sebastian Marquardt for the good cooperation during the project. When doing a migration from one monitoring system to another, it's certainly crucial to understand the different concepts those systems work with. And Zabbix uses a different approach to, for example, collect data or to do problem analysis and alerting than OpenIT Cockpit does. And this slide shows you the differences. So on the left-hand side we have the OpenIT Cockpit side of things, and on the right-hand side we have the Zabbix side of things. And you can see, for example, we have different template types in OpenIT Cockpit. There's a service template, which is usually what you would expect to collect data and to do alerting. And they also have what is called what are called host templates with host availability checks. That is something Zabbix does not know in this sense. It's a special check you define, which gives you as a result the host availability status. So you define one check, one metric, and if this metric fails, then you treat the host as not being available. Also, we have, of course, hosts and host groups. They have the idea of contacts, where in Zabbix we have just users, so they do differentiate between contacts and users. And the contacts also include then the type of alert the contact would like to get, and there are contact groups. And last but not least, there's a term satellite, which would translate in Zabbix Parlor to Zabbix proxy. There are a lot of more entities involved, but these are the important ones to get a better understanding throughout the presentation here. To give you a better idea, here are some screenshots. Apologize that most of the details are blacked out, but I think you know why. So here we see the front end of the OpenIT Cockpit dashboard, and we see the host section. And when we click on one of the hosts, then we see our host data, and you see that there are definitions for this host check. And on the next slide you will see also the details for the host availability status definition. So this in turn is also one check that, as I said before, returns whether the host in question is available or not available. Most of the checks are having a command line like this one here, which is configured in the front end. That is somehow similar to Zabbix and somehow different, because in Zabbix you actually do provide a key, and depending on the type of check you are running, the key has the key does just the selection and the parameter matters. And here it's a little bit different, as you can see. This slide shows the service availability status definitions. Remember, host definitions, or the host check defines whether the host itself is available or not available, while the services are more the metrics by themselves. And again, we see that we have a command line, we have an output, and we have a check command that actually does something. So that's how it looks from the OpenIT cockpit side of things. So when we do the work, we need to migrate host and host groups, and also we need to migrate user and user groups. And I put this together in the slide here in the same section simply because, as you remember, Zabbix uses the relation between host groups and user groups to control the permissions. So that's why we put it together here. So our idea is here to migrate the existing host groups and user groups, and also to keep the information about the checks, because you have seen in the previous slide that the checks are part of the host definition. So our goal is here to export host and host groups from OpenIT Cockpit and import them into Zabbix. And we would like to do the same thing for user and user groups, and also to get media information from OpenIT Cockpit, because they are also part of the user definition. And also we would like to keep information about the checks per host intact. And what I mean by that is when we do the import for the host groups, it would be nice that we know which checks have been assigned to a host, so we can later on more easily decide which templates to assign and so on. And the challenges here are how to get the host and host groups information from OpenIT Cockpit, and the same goes for user groups and media information. And also the question is how to get the information about the checks and keep them in Zabbix. And our approach was that we are using OpenIT Cockpit's REST API to get information about the host and host groups and containers. There's another term that's being used there, and of course also the checks. And we do the same thing for the user and user groups and the media information. And then we create entities in Zabbix using the Zabbix API. And we do that based on the JSON output we receive from OpenIT Cockpit. So that's basically the idea. And also we store information about the checks in the host description field to facilitate template mapping later on. So that makes life so much easier. On the bottom of the slide you see some URLs. These are the REST API endpoints to get certain information, like for example host.json gives you the host list, while host/id from a particular host gives you information about a particular host. So that's pretty straightforward, and I have to say really convenient to work with. And the same goes for contact. So context.json gives us the list of contacts, while contact/id give us the information for each contact. This is a response from from the host endpoint, providing the list of hosts. You see some data like an ID, an UUID, a name, a description, etc. And you see some notes how we map those information from the endpoint to our Zabbix installation. So name was mapped to host name, description was mapped to host description, and you see that the satellite, for example, is then mapped to the ID of the corresponding Zabbix proxy on the Zabbix side of things. Container ID, etc. is used to actually define the Zabbix host groups. And here the same for the user information. So username, description, email, phone, and we are using that to map media information like media email, media SMS, and also we have some severity settings that we can integrate into our Zabbix installation. And here you see the result of our import. So we wrote a small application that did the work for us, and that is how the outcome looked in Zabbix. And important to note the description field. So you see that we added the information about the existing checks on the OpenIT Cockpit side as a comment within Zabbix to help for further migration. Now, after the work was done for host groups, user and user groups, etc., the next was to migrate checks and templates. And this one was a little bit more sophisticated. The goal was to migrate checks and templates to Zabbix and also to improve monitoring while migrating by utilizing Zabbix features, which means that our goal was not only to put all what was existing in OpenIT Cockpit to Zabbix, but to actually do the work the Zabbix way. So it's really integrated into Zabbix and uses Zabbix features. So some of the checks we were able to migrate, and some of the checks and templates it was necessary to rewrite them. So the challenge here was how to create Zabbix templates based on data from OpenIT Cockpit, and how to create the Zabbix actions, and also how to assign and create Zabbix template based on information that we got from the other system. And again, here the approach was to use the information we imported before and stored in the host description field. That made the life so much easier. We used information also from the OpenIT Cockpit templates and their assignments, and we created then new templates that at minimum cover what was monitored before or more, depending on the host and the system and the environment. And we assigned then templates to host, and for the simple checks in OpenIT Cockpit, like ping, like SSH checks, like telnet checks, like server checks, etc. I apologize for that. That was easy to do in a way that we could automate it, because there was corresponding checks on the Zabbix side available. And of course we needed to create the Zabbix actions. Any non-standard check that was defined, so any user-defined script, that was necessary to check it one by one and to do the migration manually, case by case. Here you see the result of the import via the Zabbix API plus manual linking of templates that we have created particular for each system. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward here. Now, after the work was done, the really challenging part started. And to give you an idea why the challenging part starts here, OpenIT Cockpit with some additional enterprise modules available has a special feature that Zabbix does not have, but it has the same name. In Zabbix, in OpenIT Cockpit, we have event correlation, and this event correlation is not the same as event correlation is in Zabbix. And I will dig into this a little bit more deep. So you see here the screen from the OpenIT Cockpit side for the event correlation definitions. It's just a list. And here you see now, if you open one of those correlations, you see a diagram that shows you how a group of hosts works together, and the result of all of the host status are merged together to create a new state, and that is called event correlation here. So we have on the left hand side we have entries which have a host and a check, or in Zabbix you would say item with a trigger. And then you see, for example, min2 here on the slide, which means that from the 3 hosts, 2 of them must respond with must be in an OK state to process. And then you see that those pairs are again put together with an AND operator. So both of those results from the min2 must match to actually set the final state to be an OK state. So I would like to treat this more like a sort of advanced service monitoring, because you can combine easily, using this logic, you combine easily services. And to get a better understanding what I mean by that, let's step into this a little bit more in detail. So imagine you have a web shop service, and imagine this web shop service has 3 services in total, which is a front-end service, a cache service, and a database service. And now imagine that the front-end services are provided by a cluster, by front-end cluster, and imagine that the cache services are provided by a cache cluster, and imagine that the database services are provided by a database cluster. So we have different scenarios now. So one scenario could be that within the front-end cluster, two of the front-end nodes stop working for whatever reason. Yeah? In this case, our front-end service would have an impact. I would consider this to be in a yellow state or in a warning state. Yeah? But our web shop service will still function. It might not function with the same performance as if all of the nodes would work, but it will still continue to work. So partial failure in the front-end cluster might be acceptable. So now have a look when all of the front-end nodes within our front-end cluster stop working. In this case, the front-end server is no longer available, and in this case, we can certainly say that our web shop would not be reachable from the outside. So a total failure in the front-end cluster will not be acceptable. Now have a look at the cache cluster. If the cache cluster goes down entirely, we can say that the cache service no longer works, but our web shop service still would work. It will not work with the same performance because we have no caching, but it will continue to work. So the web shop service in this scenario, I would treat the web shop service to be in a yellow state, so in a warning state, but it will be functional. So this is basically the idea of service monitoring or advanced service monitoring. So you have different criteria for different dependencies within your service architecture. And our goal was to mimic the functionality of OpenIT Cockpit's events correlation, which is some sort of advanced service management in Zabbix. And the service module in Zabbix is not sufficient for that, so it can't do this. And we also would like to have a solution to recreate all of the existing configurations from the IP cockpit installation. So anything that was defined in the event correlation management in IT cockpit had to work in Zabbix. So we need to develop a solution also update safe without touching the Zabbix source code. So we will be compatible with previous versions like 5.0, 5.2, but also with further versions like 5.4/6.0. And the challenges here were how to integrate into Zabbix with respect to configuration and also with visualization, and how to make it update safe. They were the key points in the design decision to solve this issue. And our approach was to use Zabbix host, trigger and services for configuration and also tags. And we use the tags to create relations between the hosts, and then we developed a backend service that does the heavy lifting, so the entire logic, and was using the Zabbix API. And we developed also a Zabbix front-end module for the visualization and configuration part. And this way it was update safe, so we didn't touch the Zabbix core code, but we created an entire own module. And the front-end module should communicate with the backend service and show the relations as flowcharts, similar to what OpenIT Cockpit did. So just a note, the Zabbix front-end module was introduced in Zabbix 5.0, and Zabbix front-end module API is not the same as the JSON RPC over HTTP API. So how does advanced service monitoring look in Zabbix using this solution here? So what we have is we have a module. You can see it on the lower part of the screen, and in the module section you can activate that module. And then you will have a new menu entry which is called Advanced Services, and then you can open this Advanced Service menu and will give you some KPIs over your services, like the number of services, the number of force and triggers involved, etc. And it will also give you a list of services functioning proper, or services items or trigger are in an unsupported state to help you fixing this. And it will also give you a good idea about which service is in which state. And when you open up a service, then you will see a flowchart, and this flowchart will be rendered in real time from the current Zabbix configuration. So this is not something you configure, but this is something that's being created based on your configuration in Zabbix, which is very convenient. And and as you can see, it allows you to see involved entities like host, items and triggers, and you can zoom in and zoom out, and the stats show you exactly the state and also the states in between for each service. Yeah. So here's a more easy to understand picture of that, because there's some demo data inside which is not blacked out. So you see the different entities here, like trigger, like services, like hosts. and you see that you can click on each of this entity to open the configuration in Zabbix directly, and you see directly the relation between those systems and services. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. Yeah? Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next time. Thank you.
And one more time, thank you, Wolfgang. Another great use case as always. And if you have any questions about this use case, the previous use case, or maybe any other question that you'd like to ask Wolfgang, feel free to use the chat or visit the Intellitrend sponsor room. Thank you.